now. Great. Okay. Yeah, great. So if you could enter in the chat where you're zooming in from, that would be really great. Before we get started with our program, before I introduce our speaker, we've got some business to just discuss. First and foremost, bird sightings. We like to start our programs with folks sharing interesting bird sightings as of late. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Julie.
We had a purple finch at our feeder this morning, which we don't get them too often here in Albany, at least not at our feeder. So that was really nice.
Cool.
For the first, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know how to get my name changed. I'm Kay Fenlon. I live in Marcellus. And yesterday morning, for the first time, we had the screech owl back in our wood duck boxes. So we've heard it. It has been at least 2 weeks ago. We were hearing it toward in September for the first time all summer. And so that was good to see. That's the earliest he's been in those boxes, and it's been so warm. So that was surprising.
Wow.
Usually November, usually we don't see him in the wood duck boxes until November. So.
Wow, that's great. I had a yellow-billed cuckoo in my yard. Unfortunately, it was injured, and so I brought it to Kindred Kingdoms Wildlife Rehabilitation today. But that's a pretty late bird. Could be late, maybe because it was injured. But anything
That's
else?
Exciting.
Yeah.
I saw that there was a yellow rail sighting recently.
Yes.
Out there and see it. I wish.
Or the weed ear. Did anyone see the weed ear? Gosh, that's an amazing bird. Yeah, I mean, and migrants are still kind of passing through. The Lemoyne woods have been pretty loaded with some fall migrants lately, which is pretty exciting. So yeah, anything else? Any other sightings to share for now?
Well, this will expose my newbie experience at bird sightings. I didn't see this bird, but for 2 nights in a row, we had a hoot owl in the backyard. And we haven't had an owl in our backyard in 30 years. It was very loud, but he's gone on to somebody else's backyard now. And I don't know what kind of owl. He just did a lot of hooting.
Okay.
The great horned owl in our yard has also been quite active lately.
Mm-hmm.
Normally they don't start calling again until like Thanksgiving time. But they've been going for a couple of weeks now in our backyard. So maybe the owls are reacting to this warmer weather.
Yeah,
something
right.
different this year.
Yeah.
Mine too. I had a pair going crazy a few nights ago in the backyard.
Wow.
Great horned owl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, this is Carol Adams. I had a ruby crowned kinglet and a pair of eastern towies.
Oh, nice.
Wow, that was in my Atlas block, actually.
Okay. Nice. Great. Okay, great. Well, look, if anyone has other sightings you think of or want to share, you can post them in the chat. Allison, did you?
Yeah, just since we were talking about feeders, really quickly, I just wanted to bring up our updated feeder guidance in case anyone hasn't seen it yet. We had previously stated that asking people to take feeders down for the summer, which I'm sure wasn't very fun for anyone, but we appreciate so many of you being willing to do that to help keep the birds safe from the potential mystery bird illness, as well as the finch eye conjunctivitis issue that we actually had a lot of this summer. A lot of birds passed away from the finch eye conjunctivitis. So, even though we didn't end up getting the mystery bird illness here, which is awesome, and probably thanks to a lot of you taking down your feeders, we also were able to probably reduce numbers of finch eye conjunctivitis because of that as well. So awesome work to everyone. But we feel like the danger has passed for now, for the most part. And so we are suggesting that if you feel comfortable that you can put your feeders back up, Just please remember that washing feeders are very important. We ask that you try to wash your feeder at least once a week. Another option would be to have multiple feeders so that you can just switch one out and then wash the one at your convenience in between. And when washing, make sure you use soap and water, and then do a 10% bleach solution to kill off any of these super dangerous bacterias and viruses that can occur on these feeders. So thank you all for doing that. And also just remember water sources as well. You need to clean if you can. I also suggest cleaning your water bowls about once a week with a 10% bleach solution, and possibly letting them dry for an hour or two just to kill off anything in there. So thanks. Just wanted to bring that up in case anyone hadn't seen that yet.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison.
Allison,
mhm.
I'm sorry. Do you know if anybody is working on the mystery bird disease, or if it's always going to remain a mystery?
Yeah, great question. So the national, well, I guess USGS is working on it, as well as people in the DEC area with the National Zoo. So there are people working on figuring this out. But I did forget to mention that if you do find carcasses that have eye injuries, especially if there's more than one, please contact the Cornell lab. I will get the information of who you can contact off of our website in just a second and put it in the chat. They are the ones in our local area that are accepting carcasses still within reason. They may or may not accept them from you, but you can definitely contact them if you have a carcass, and it's possible that they'll accept it to do testing.
Great, thank you. Dory, Allison, anybody on the board, any other announcements or things to say? The upcoming field trip is this coming Sunday, led by yours truly. You can see information on our Facebook page or webpage about that. I do have a few more spots left on that trip, so reach out and let me know if you're interested. And then Dory, are there other field trips in October? No.
No, none in October. The
Okay.
next one is in November, and I think that's to Fairhaven State Park with Bill Purcell.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. And then, of course, we have our November program.
Yes.
The last program of the fall will be Wednesday, November 10th at 6:30 p.m. Mark your calendars. I think it will likely be a virtual program again, but please stay tuned for details about that.
And we are part of the Onondaga Conservation Corps, and they are having a program on October 23rd. It will actually be an in-person program. We'll be out on the lake, Onondaga Lake shore, and they're going to be using a drone to photograph the lake. And they're going to teach people how they use the drone, how it works, and how they get video, and what they use the video for. So if you're interested, go to the Onondaga Lake Conservation Corps Facebook page. I'll put a link in the chat in case you're interested, and you can sign up. I'm not sure. It might be a $5 program, not sure.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks everyone. So before I introduce our speaker finally, just one last time, if you could be sure to mute yourself if you're not speaking. And I have a little control over that too, so I could mute you if you forget, but please do that if you could. Great. So Julie, if you want to start sharing your screen, I'll introduce you. So we're delighted tonight to have Julie Hart, New York Breeding Bird Atlas Project Coordinator. Julie is a native Vermonter, and she started birding while working as a bird conservation intern with National Audubon, New York, and the Cornell Lab. She's traveled for several years doing field work around the globe, and then finally returned back to Vermont, where she served as a coordinator for Mountain Bird Watch with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies. She spent several years chasing Bicknell thrush around the mountains of the Northeast and Hispaniola before moving to Wyoming to continue her education. She received her master's degree studying the impacts of climate change on Cassia crossbill in southern Idaho. After spending several years abroad, she is now settled in the Albany area where she's serving as project coordinator for our third breeding bird atlas here in New York. In her travels, she's participated in bird atlases, 3 bird atlases, and really considers that one of her favorite parts of her job. So without further ado, Julie, take it away. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jason. And I'm really sorry when we originally booked this, we did plan for it to be in person. But yeah, it didn't turn out that way. And it might be for the best because I am getting over a spell of bronchitis. And so I do apologize in advance if I start, my voice is a little wonky, and I apologize if I start coughing here and there. Hopefully I don't have any fits, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. So I am really excited. I haven't actually given a talk to a bird club for a while now. So this is a fun change of pace for me. I'm really glad to be here and to get to know you guys. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the Breeding Bird Atlas, about what it is and how you can participate, and also what we have found so far. Oops. There we go. So I want to start really briefly with what an atlas is. And an atlas is really just this snapshot in time of a particular group of species within a certain time period, within a certain geographical space. And so the way that most atlases work in New York State, we've done atlases for birds, for herps, we're doing one now for mammals, for dragonflies. So now we're doing one, we just finished up one for pollinators as well. So there's been a long history of these atlas projects in New York State. And the way that we make them much more manageable is by breaking the state down into smaller blocks, what we call atlas blocks. And then within each of those blocks, we ask people such as yourselves to go out and make observations of what they're finding within each of those blocks. So when people go out, they are observing breeding behaviors. In this case, this is the Breeding Bird Atlas. And so we're looking for anything that might signal that a bird is breeding locally in that area. So here, somebody went out in Syracuse area and saw 2 kestrels copulating. And then the final step for participating in the atlas is to then submit the data through eBird. So it's really timely that Jason is giving the walk and presentation on eBird this weekend. So in case you're not already using eBird, it's a very powerful tool that I think, not just because we use it for the atlas, but also just for your own birding enjoyment and for improving your skills and telling you where to go and when to go to see certain things. So that's basically, those are like the 3 essentials, what we call the 3 essentials for atlasing, is visiting a block, observing breeding behaviors, and then submitting your data into eBird. So it's really that simple. And then what happens is we will end up with a whole map for each species of where the birds are located. And so that's what we have here. This is the current map for American kestrel, just based on the first 2 years of this atlas project. And so because we're using eBird, we get all that data in real time, and it's instantly available to everyone and also to me, as I can see. Anyone can go onto our website and get this information, this map themselves. And it gives us this really detailed, like I said, snapshot in time of where each species is breeding. And so then what we would end up with is a whole compilation for all roughly 250 species that are breeding in the state. So we'll end up with a map like that. And we're not sure if we're going to have a book or just a website, but there will be a final product as well. So all that information will be readily accessible to everyone. And so one of the key things about this atlas, so this is, as Jason mentioned, the 3rd breeding bird atlas in the state. So we do them every 20 years in New York State. The first one was in 1980. The second one started in 2000. And now we started this one in 2020. And so on the left here, I added in the map that was produced through the efforts of the second atlas, so the 2000 to 2005 atlas. And you can see that we're doing pretty well. You know, we're already 2 years into a 5-year project, and we have captured a lot of their range already. We do have some areas, as you can see, that that still need to be filled in. But that's one of the beauties of doing this project at these designated time intervals, is that we can really look and see how things change over time. And I'll show you some of these long-term changes in a little bit. So the reason that we do these atlas projects is because of many different reasons. The breeding bird atlas is one of the most used and relied upon tools that we have for conservation of all species and of our habitats in New York State, because it is a comprehensive study that really covers the entire state really well. It gives us a really good idea of what's happening on the ground all across the state. So we can use it to look at how things are changing over time. So like I just showed you with the American kestrel, you can see how things are changing over time. And we can, assess whether or not that's from climate change or land use changes. We can identify areas that are really important for species of conservation concern, and we can then use that to develop land use plans that will account for the presence of those rare species. We can do lots of scientific research using the data. From the first 2 atlases, there was I think at least 7 or 8 scientific publications have come out of the looking at the first two atlases and looking at changes over that time period. One of them actually looking at the effects of climate change and how it already, even between 1980 to 2000, was starting to have an impact and causing species to move northward. So it's a really large data set that's super powerful and allows scientists to answer a lot of different questions. And then it's also, for me, one of the best parts about working on a community science project is that I get to know a lot of different people across the state, and it's just a really great way to engage people in nature activities and introduce people to birding and the joys of just being outside. And then lastly, also for population management, the information is really valuable to say, like, oh, this species is declining, golden-winged warblers, cerulean warblers, red-headed woodpeckers, all these species that we know are declining in the state. We can actually use the information from the atlas in order to say, hey, we need to do something for these species. And here are the remaining hotspots where those species are still found. And these are the areas that we should still preserve and maintain for those species. So as I mentioned, it's just a really valuable tool in many different ways for conservation and for just general enjoyment as well. Of course, the data also has larger scale implications beyond just New York. I'm sure you're all familiar by now with the 3 billion birds lost. And then also the Audubon report that came out about the same time as that paper in the fall of 2019, saying that 2/3 of our birds are at risk of extinction from climate change. And one of the major sources of data for looking at these changes over time and is eBird. So the fact that we're putting all of our data for the atlas into eBird means that we're getting a really good value out of those data. So it's not just going to be used for one purpose, just for the atlas, but also for these global conservation efforts as well. that's a little bit about the atlas and how it works. So I wanted to show you just some of the things that we have been finding so far. So I'll just reiterate again that we are only in the we've only just finished the second year of a 5-year project. So the project will go through the end of 2024. And this is the third atlas that we've done in New York State. So far, we have over 2,300 volunteers, and I'm really excited about that number. That's just like amazing. I think that there's so many people in the state and surrounding areas that are really excited about atlasing and are participating. Those people have submitted over 250,000 checklists. And so far, more than 90% of the priority blocks have been visited. So I did show you a map that had all the blocks on the state. We did systematically select a third of those blocks that we really want to be covered no matter what. And then as many of the other blocks as possible covered as well. So of those priority blocks we've covered, we've actually had somebody on the ground submitting data from 92% of those already. So that's really great as well. And so far we've confirmed the breeding of 218 species. That's up 3 species over last year. So this year we were able to document, let's see, northern saw-whet owl, northern shoveler, and common eider. So that's pretty exciting. There's still a number of other species that I'm pretty sure are breeding in the state that are not in our data set yet. So hopefully we'll capture those in the next few years. And so far there have been over 4 million observations, and 1 million of those have had breeding codes. So a breeding code just means like, I saw a behavior and this is the behavior that I saw. So it's a huge amount of data. It's more data than we've had for previous atlases. And actually there's now this new generation of atlases that are being run through eBird. And New York has by far way more data than any of the other states, even states that have finished their 5-year data collection. So we're really rocking it here in New York. We've got really dedicated some really dedicated atlasers. So it's been really great to see. So one of the things that we did last year after the first year of the atlas was we sent out a volunteer feedback survey, and we asked people why they're participating in the atlas. So up until last year, I had this whole talk that I would give to bird clubs about the joys of atlasing from my perspective, because atlasing for me is the most rewarding type of birding for me, because I like to go slower and I like to actually observe the birds and see what they're doing and figure out why they're doing this there instead of there, and why this time of year instead of that time of year, asking more of these types of questions. And so for me, it's just like always been the way that I bird. But there's a whole lot of other reasons that other people say that they participate in the atlas and what they get out of it. So instead of telling you what I think are the joys of atlasing, I compiled some of the top things that volunteers have themselves said. And I think that this probably resonates with any of you who have tried their hand at atlasing. So, running through these, it's like, contributing to science and conservation is obviously a top one, but giving people a reason to go birding in the middle of summer, there's this like theory or myth that there's not really much things that are fun to see with birding. There's not as many rarities happening right in the middle of summer. It's the summer doldrums. But there's so many really interesting behaviors and things going on that I think it's a fascinating time to go birding. So this really gets people out there, and it gives people a lot more respect for just like the daily struggles that these birds go through, because you end up like getting to know like a particular pair at a nest, and you can track their success over the season. And so you really get to know these birds, and you feel bad if their nest fails, or you're kind of sad when they've left and they're not there anymore reliably. So it does really increase your respect for the birds. It gives you an added sense of purpose. It's just another reason to be outside. Many people said that they had never watched bird behaviors before, and it was absolutely fascinating. And there was like some people that were like, I've been birding in my backyard for 30 years and I didn't even know that this species was here. I didn't know that they bred in the area. I didn't know that they were in my yard. But just like amazing things were like, oh, I saw something in this habitat where I never would have thought that it would be, but because they're paying closer attention, they saw all these things. And so then you start to get to learn more things about their habitats that they're honing in on for breeding purposes or for foraging, just the timing of when they're here, and when they're busy during their breeding season, what they're eating, what they're using to build their nest, where they build their nest. And actually, one of the really surprising things to me was that people said not only do they improve their birding skills, but it like was really helpful for people to really get into sound identification. So it's one of the big hurdles for birders is to get on top of those, knowing what all the sounds are that you're hearing and being able to identify things. And this was a great way for people to slowly build up their skills at sound ID. So that was really exciting. And I did throw on here just the top atlasers in Onondaga County, just in case some of these names are familiar to you, because these are some of the people that are really out there a lot. Obviously, you guys all know Allison, but maybe there's some other names on here that you recognize as well. And, these are people that you could, if you run into them and you're interested in atlasing, you should talk to them about it and try to join them in the field if that's of interest to you. So there's a lot of joy, I think, that comes from atlasing, but hopefully that helps you realize that it's not just me saying these things, but like all the people that participate in the project also find it to be a really fun and rewarding experience. So a little bit more about the data that we've been collecting. So eBird allows you to look at the data in a number of different ways. You can look at it, by species, by region, or you can get these statewide maps as well, just to see how much coverage overall there has been. And so on the top here, we've got total number of hours on the top left, and then the number of confirmed breeding observations. So there's different scales of breeding observations from, something like singing where, we suspect that it's probably breeding there, so it's possible breeding, versus like they're actually going through, showing courtship or copulation. They're probably breeding right there. And then there's things like, they're building a nest, or they're feeding young, or something like that. And then that would be a confirmed breeding. So it's just a little bit stronger evidence that they're breeding locally. So that's what I mean when I say the number of confirmed species. And then on the bottom, you can see, I'm sorry, I screwed up. I can't see the top of my screen because of the Zoom controls. Sorry. So the top is just the number of like observations, and the bottom is the number of hours during the day, and then you have the nocturnal hours on the lower right. And so if you look at the top two maps and then also the daytime hour maps, you can see that we're doing really, really well in the urban areas and suburban areas. But there are these, consistent holes in certain places, the same places that we've always had trouble with getting coverage for atlases. So it's not a surprise, it's areas with lower density or more difficult terrain in order to access. So there's still a lot of opportunity to fill in some of these more remote areas. And then in terms of nocturnal coverage, that's not just owls, but it's also nightjars and rails and things like that. So there's a lot of other species that you can really only capture at dawn, dusk, or in the dark. And so we do want people to try to get nocturnal coverage. And so far, we have a long ways to go to get nocturnal coverage across the state. I think it's been a bit inhibited by COVID, but also just we're so used to birding in the mornings that most people aren't used to going out at night, and we're not comfortable with it, and we don't know those sounds as well, and things like that. So that's something that we're also working on going forward, is getting more nocturnal coverage. But by and large, I'm really happy with the amount of coverage that we've achieved so far in 2 global pandemic years, with people not traveling as much as normal. So I think we're doing an amazing job. I also looked at the number of hours. I just plotted it in terms of by county. I think it's maybe a little simpler way to look at it, at the information and in a way that we're more used to looking at the state at the county level. And so this shows you just the discrepancy in how much you can see, like Ithaca with the Cornell lab is just off the charts in terms of the number of hours that they have put into atlasing. It's just, we don't need any more coverage in Ithaca, but in Cortland, we do. We need a lot of coverage in Cortland. And so, and same thing like Syracuse area, Onondaga and Oswego have decent coverage, but just next door, Madison and Oneida are really behind. And so, number of hours isn't everything, obviously, but it does give us some sort of indication of how much effort has been put into those areas and how well we have captured the breadth of birds that are breeding in those areas. And then on the right, I just put in a small little table just to show you the number of hours by county in your area, in the Onondaga Audubon area. Okay, so I mentioned that I would show some time lapses to show you like how much the distribution of some species has changed over the years. So this is where I think the atlas is really fun and exciting and interesting to look at how species have changed over time since we started doing the first atlas in 1980. And so one of the really fun ones, we all know that bald eagles are a great conservation success story, but actually seeing it like these maps, I think is really powerful. So you can see on the left map here is from the first atlas, there's 2 of these dark brown blocks where there was confirmed breeding. And then you jump to 2000 and 2005, and this is 2 decades of really active reintroductions and on the ground work to try to get that population back. And they spread a lot in that 20 years. But then now you look at what we have documented just in the first 2 years of the atlas. And again, there has been just this huge increase It's just dramatic. I think there's like something like 250 blocks where it's been confirmed breeding. It's crazy, just to see the change within such a short time. It's just a really amazing success story. And similarly, I also find the osprey map to be really interesting as well. In the 1980s, they were really Adirondacks and Long Island, and that was pretty much it. And then they started to expand a bit in 2000, and now they're like all across the state where there's a lot of water, in areas with water. So that's really fun. Another fun thing to look at are some of the species like Merlin and black vulture, which were not even present in the state during the first atlas and have since expanded into the state. So Merlin wasn't documented in New York until the early 1990s. And then by 2000, they had really, colonized the Adirondacks pretty well, and had started spreading a bit into the rest of the state. And now in these first 2 years of this atlas, we can see that they have continued to expand during the last 20 years. And I suspect that map will get filled in quite a bit more. I think this is one of those species where people, myself included, are not super familiar with their breeding habits because they're such a newcomer to our avifauna in New York State. And so I think more people will run into them in the next few years of the atlas. All right, on the flip side, there are some species that we know are not doing as well. And so I only have a couple of examples here, but we can look at cerulean warbler and see that it's not like as dramatic as the changes that you saw with like bald eagle, but you can see that there was quite a bit of range constriction from 1980 to 2000. And now the 2020 to 2021 map, obviously we're not done with the atlas, so it's not a fair comparison. We're not, comparing, the full effort of the project. But it does, indicate to us where we should be putting more effort into to try to see if they are still remaining in those areas. Maybe gives us some, a reassurance that our other survey methods are correct and that cerulean warblers have continued to decline in the state. Time will tell, but it's just interesting to kind of look at and see how we're doing. Similarly, barn swallows, that's a species that used to breed all across the state, except in the interior Adirondacks. And then in the 2000 atlas, it was a little less densely occupied. And now you can see, again, we only have 2 years of data, but something we know is that aerial insectivores are declining, and they've been, really hard hit, particularly by the insect decline. And so this could be an indication that, barn swallows are like everybody who birds knows what a barn swallow is. They're super easy to confirm breeding. And so you would think that there would be more confirmations and more maybe spread across the state a bit more already in terms of even being in just year 2. So it is a little bit cause for concern. Hopefully we'll fill in that map a bit more, but we'll see. And I did just want to say, just in case, I know some people I've talked to have been surprised to learn about swallows declining. It's like the first time they've heard about it. But the State of Canada's birds, the most recent report they've shown that aerial insectivores are the most declined group of birds in Canada, even more so than grassland birds, not by much, but but still even more than grassland birds. And so, yeah, something that we should really keep an eye on, and I think we'll be able to observe changes in their populations through some of the ATLAS data that are collected. So that's some of the changes. There's other species like trumpeter swan and sandhill crane and Caspian terns and things like that have also expanded their range quite a bit in the state. And I don't know, probably you guys are all familiar with the Great Lakes piping plover by now too, that they're back and breeding again, and we've got them documented. That we've got them documented in the ATLAS, thanks to Allison and a couple others. And so there are a lot of like really great success stories, I think, and just like the number of sandhill cranes. I encourage you to go onto the ATLAS website and look at the sandhill crane map. I think it's pretty cool to see. I mean, there's still only like 20 or something nests in the state, but that's a lot more than we used to have. So it's pretty exciting. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about how, in case you're interested in participating, I want to talk a little bit more about how you can actually get started and start participating in the project. And so one of the first things that I recommend is to really figure out how you can best participate in the project. There's a lot of different ways, and it really depends on your interests, your skills, your time availability, and lots of other factors. And so I think one of the easiest ways to do it is to start up atlasing is to identify your strength and your interest, and start with that. A lot of people will just take an entire block and say, okay, this is the block I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to cover all the habitats and throughout the whole year. And that's a really great way to do it. But some people might not be as comfortable with grassland birds as they are with forest birds or with marsh birds or something, or, not be comfortable with nocturnal atlasing and just want to stick to the daytime and things like that. So really getting to know, figuring out yourself what you're most interested in, I think is the first step. And these are some of the ways that I think about different strengths and skills and ways that you can participate. And that's with, looking at different habitats, as I mentioned. So I'm definitely a forest and montane person. And I'm not as good with grasslands or marshes. So for me, I would be trying to find those large forest patches with hiking trails, and that's where I would be heading to. But other people might be, wanting to tromp around through the marshes. So, figuring out that I think is a great way to go. There's a lot of species that are breeding early and late throughout the year too. So, making sure that you're paying attention to the time of year and what species you're likely to see. Like you can go to the Adirondacks and go skiing in March and find Canada jays on the nest. They breed extremely early when there's still snow on the ground. And so, there's lots of different ways that, you can get out there in Atlas. You can spend time during the day and hit up some of the remote blocks. You can go out at night, which is basically needed everywhere in the state. And then you can also I know that you can go to look at a list of species in a block and say, I know that there's such and such breeding in a block, but it hasn't been reported yet. And then you can go and fill in that gap. And then the other thing you can do is say, oh, I see that. So a lot of times you'll look at the data for a single block and see that rock pigeon hasn't been confirmed breeding yet, or starling or something. And you're like, I know where the rock pigeons are. I know where that phoebe is. And I can go confirm those, and then you can fill in those gaps as well. So there's a lot of different ways to get started and participate. And the second thing, as you know, we talked about as Atlas Essentials, right? Observing breeding behaviors. We have tried to really simplify the instructions here in terms of, you know, compared to previous atlases, there were a lot of restrictions on what we would ask you to submit and when you would submit it. And we were asking people to do a lot of interpretation in the field. And so we've tried to really cut back on the amount of biological knowledge that you need to have going out in the field. So we're asking you to just record what you see where you see it. That's as simple, that's boiled down to the core of what we're asking. So if you hear a bird singing, record it. If you see a bird doing courtship, record it. And basically don't, you know, just use common sense, right? Like if you're not sure, then you can always add comments as well to that species in your eBird checklist. You can add notes that explains, here's what I saw. I'm not sure if this code is right or not. And then when I go and review it, then I'll see, oh, okay, and I'll know what to do with the observation. So here's just a few examples of breeding behaviors and some of the codes that are used. So we have a bobolink carrying food. The only reason they're doing that is because they're taking the food to a young bird or to its mate on the nest. So that's a good sign that they're breeding locally. Common terns have pretty obvious courtship rituals that they do. Most of us are familiar with them, you know, going up and down and fanning out their wings and presenting fish to each other and stuff. So that's like a really obvious courtship, kind of courtship. Nest with young for the great blue herons, that's as good as it gets, basically. That's the strongest piece of evidence that you can get that a bird is breeding. So that's great. There's the prothonotary warbler. Sorry. I know that there's a number of them that nest in your area, and they, you know, you can see them if you're there at the right time of year. You can see them checking out all the different holes and trying to figure out where they want to actually build their nest. And then you might see them building the nest. And then later on, you'll see them going in and out, in and out, in and out, feeding their young. So it's kind of a fun one to watch over time. Mute swans, a lot of the waterfowl are really easy to confirm. You just got to wait for those babies to come, and then they're following around their parents, and you can call them recently fledged young. And then there are some species like Bicknose thrush, which are extremely hard to confirm breeding because you never see them. You're most likely just to hear them. But singing still does give us some information that the bird is present and is at least attempting to breed in the area. So even having those S's for singing birds is really important too. So remember, just record what you see, where you see it. That's the bottom line. Use common sense and then add notes if you're not sure. And then the crucial piece is to submit the data. And we are using eBird. eBird is free for anyone. You can create a free account and you can enter data either online or using the mobile app. I highly recommend using the mobile app if you have a smartphone. It saves a lot of time. It might not seem like it when you're starting out, but it really does save a lot of time. The other great thing about it is that it automatically is tracking how far you're moving and how much time you're out there. So that gives us really useful information when we're trying to look at how much effort has been spent in an area. You can enter that as well through the web portal, but it may not be quite as accurate. But there are still a lot of people, I know a lot of atlasers that still just prefer to write things down in the field on a note in their notebook, or we actually have some checklists that you can print out to use in the field on the Atlas website. And so if you prefer to have the checklist format as well, that is available to you as well. So the key thing is to submit your data to the Atlas portal. So whether you're using the website or the mobile, you need to make sure that you're using the Atlas portal. So on the website, you're just going to go, oops, sorry. You're going to go to ebird.org/atlasny. And if you're in the mobile app, you're going to go into the settings and you're going to set the portal. There's a section there to set the portal to New York Breeding Bird Atlas. And I do, there's a chat at the beginning where I put a link to tutorials for the Atlas. And I have a YouTube video showing you how to set that on your mobile phone. It's pretty easy. And Jason can probably show you how to do that this weekend too, if you're on the field trip. So to help people get started with atlasing, we also have lots of resources, and I'm continually making additional resources, but we've got, guides, different guides that we put together for nocturnal birds, for just different types of bird behaviors, how to recognize fledglings, marsh birds, grassland birds. We're trying to hit all the big difficult groups and providing really detailed guides for how to go out and atlas for those species. And then I'm also doing these really in-depth looks at different species. So I do a species spotlight in each of the Atlas newsletters. And in there, I try to provide really detailed information about that one species. So on the left here, you can see I looked into American woodcock, and I, sorry, this is actually a place that was in one of the blocks around here. And I had this friendly competition with another Atlas coordinator in Maryland this last spring, and we were trying to see which one of us could go out and get more woodcocks during a 2-week period. And I actually won. Thank you. I won. But this was one of the places that I looked at in one of the blocks near here. And I looked at it, I looked at the aerial photos, and I looked at the habitat that was there, and I was like, there's got to be a woodcock here. So these 2 red circled areas, I was like, there has to be a woodcock here. There's water nearby, there's some more open forest, and you've got this power line cut. And sure enough, I went, and of course I had several different woodcock painting there and doing their courtship flights. So I give you tips like that for different species. When I have enough data, I'm also, if you look at on the right-hand side for bald eagle, I'm also trying to show you, like, here's the timeline. This is the breeding calendar for each species. This is when you're likely to see each of the different breeding behaviors that you can enter, that you can observe, and also like know when you're which behavior you're most likely to see at any given time. So I've done these for a number of different species, and I'll keep doing those. I think they're kind of fun. And I try to pick difficult species, like upland sandpiper, chimney swift, yellow-billed cuckoo. Actually, I did. And then also the most recent one I did was for red crossbill. So yeah, I studied crossbills for my master's, so I kind of have a fondness for them. But they are actually breeding right now in New York State, and it's one of those species that we only get, 1 or 2 years out of the 5-year Atlas project, that there'll actually be a lot of them breeding across the state. And they have been here last year and this year. And right now they have young. They breed in like June and July, and they have young this time of year. So in terms of the breeding calendar, this time of year it's kind of dull for breeding birds. but it's kind of the, you know, little bit of a break between seasons right now. This is when I'm doing a lot of data analysis and data review and whatnot, but there are still a couple of birds out there that are attempting to breed. So that being crossbills, barn owl, which there's not that many left in the state, but they do breed at any time of year. They've been documented breeding in New York in November. So they're a possibility at any time. Come, you know, around Thanksgiving, you'll start hearing the great horned owls picking up their calling, and they'll start doing their duets, so they're courting. And then by Christmas, you've got bald eagles and ravens and some other birds that are starting to already build their nests and be back on territory. So there's never a dull moment in the year. I also have a guide for early breeders, which covers a lot of these species, and plus a bunch of others that you might not realize are early breeders, like horned larks and things like that. So yeah, so that's if you're interested in going out atlasing right now and want a good challenge, I would say head to the Adirondacks or the Catskills or like around Cortland, in Cortland County, and try to find some crossbills. All right, so there are also a lot of opportunities we have for people to connect with other atlasers and to stay up to date in terms of what's happening throughout the year. And we do a lot of other smaller projects as well. So one of the things that we do, we're really trying to get more information about nightjars in the state. So that's the nighthawk, whippoorwill, and Chuckwell's widow. And there's just not much data on them in New York. The state, DC, has asked us to help and try to transfer their project over into a volunteer-based project. So we've been piloting that the last 2 years, and that's something that we plan to continue. And so every May and June, we're asking people to go out and survey for those species. And we are asking, like, so, you know, most of the whippoorwills and Chuckwell's widow are on Long Island. Most of the whippoorwills are in the eastern half of the state, but nightjars are across the entire state. And so we are asking people even in central and western New York to try to do some of these surveys to try to find nighthawks. They're actually declining more than the other two species. During the breeding season from like March to August, one of the things that I've started because of COVID is holding monthly town halls. So at the beginning of every month, I'll just hold an open question and answer period for everyone to come and ask whatever questions you have. It could be technology, it could be what's breeding, what they're seeing, how to interpret something, how to, you know, find a block or figure out where to go, like anything. So those have been really successful. And then this year we also started a big like awareness campaign, kind of fun competition event at the end of June. That's we're calling the Big Atlas Weekend. And we did that with 3 other atlases that are going on in the US right now. So we did it with Maine, Maryland, and DC, and North Carolina. So it was a big project. And we had over 1,000 people participate from all 4 states and collected a ton of information. And it was really fun. And we had some other events associated with it. And that's, I think, a really great way to increase awareness of breeding birds. So that's something we'll be continuing in the future. And then there's also constantly events that I or the regional coordinators are holding all across the state. So talks and walks and things like that. So here's a map of some of the regional coordinators across the state. I will say that right now in the central region, we just have Charlie Scheim, and he is on the call, or he was. But we are seeking more regional coordinators in central New York. So if you're interested, I would be more than happy to talk to you. It is a paid contracted position, and it's really based on outreach and engagement and just trying to spread the word and help people, answering questions when they have problems with eBird or breeding behaviors or something like that. So I think it's quite fun. It gives you a nice connection to people. So anyways, yeah, if anyone is interested, please let me know. And then lastly, a couple other ways, and then I'm just about done. There's a couple other ways you can support the Alice. So we do have an online store on Zazzle, and you can get all kinds of Alice swag on there. We do accept one-time donations, and then we actually have a sponsor a species program where you can sponsor any of the species that breed in New York State. And if you sponsor them for all 5 years of the Atlas, then your name will be on that species account and profile in the final product. So that's a fun way to support the Atlas as well. And then I also have a whole list of ideas for if your bird club wants to be more involved. So there's a lot of different things, and I don't need to run through all of these right now. They are on our website, and I'd be happy to follow up with people. But there's a lot of ways to, take on a block or heading to areas that haven't been covered well, leading walks, just spreading information on your website and social media and things like that. So it really will take the whole birding community in New York State to finish this project. So I'm always happy to make more connections that way. All right, and then this is my last slide, and we are quite active on social media. And so if you are on social media and want to connect with us, then please do. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a discussion group on Facebook, which is very active, and there's a lot of people that are, a lot of the regional coordinators are on there, and so we're all answering questions. It's also a fun place just to share observations that you're seeing too. And then I do have a lot of, I have a few tutorials and some talk recordings and things like that also on our YouTube channel. So that's another place to follow us. Yeah, and then if you have any questions, then you can feel free to email me. You can reach me at this email here on the bottom, nyBBA3@gmail.com. And yeah, I thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions. Hopefully, I like the question part the most because it's where I get to know what you guys are thinking. And yeah. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. Round of finger snaps. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of really great information. Such an excellent overview of this really, really important project. So we're delighted to have you speak to us about it. Are there any questions folks have? I guess I'll just get started. I'm wondering if you can speak to how the effort information gets incorporated here, specifically that this is a 5-year, that there are multiple years involved in these data, how, variation from one year to the next might get incorporated in the final product.
Yeah, there's a lot of different layers to that question.
Sorry.
Some may not be as interesting for others as some other parts of it. Yeah, I mean, probably you're aware that, having that effort information allows you to account for differences in detectability between different observers, right? So that's the big thing. And that's why we do ask everyone to submit their own eBird data, because that way we can account for your different skills from somebody else, right? But I think the bigger question over that 5-year period, yeah, that is hard. And I think that that's where taking a longer term view that this is like, now we're going to have like 40 years of changes that we can actually look at becomes important because, if something gets documented as breeding in year 1, and then that grassland, say, is paved over in year 2, it still is a confirmed breeding for the Atlas period, right? So it's still going to be recorded as it was breeding during the project period. So that is one drawback of having it be a multi-year project. The other thing that I find really interesting is because I've been so tapped into the breeding phenology last year and this year, is just, really seeing how much weather affects the timing of things. So that makes my job a bit harder in terms of reviewing the data. Because, it's would be nice if I could just say, oh, anything before this date that can't be breeding locally. But that's not the case, right? We all know that there's so much variation. There's variation across the state. There's variation within a location. Even within, some of the blocks here in the Albany area, you've got areas that are like, basically zero, basically at sea level. And then you've got this huge escarpment. And so you've got like 1,000 feet next to it. So there's a lot of different things that come into play. And like this year, oh my God, it was just so bizarre, I felt like, because we had just all these major rainstorms in the beginning of the year, and a lot of birds failed. And a lot of them had to re-nest. And I think that's what people have been seeing. There's been a lot of late nesters that people have been reporting. So, like cardinals and catbirds and things like that, still feeding young at the beginning of this month, like just crazy timing. And so accounting for that variation from one year to the next, just in terms of like reviewing the data and just like seeing, oh, is that really a valid observation or not? It makes it challenging. But yeah, so that's something we're trying to work out.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions from anybody?
Hi, Julie, I have a question. So way back when the Atlas first started before COVID, and those like 2 months that we had before COVID, you had mentioned the possibility of blockbusting, like going to some of these more remote areas as a group, because I know for me, what is keeping me away from the more like remote areas is I just don't really have the money to go out there, just, but if there was some kind of an organized thing that might lower the cost, I would definitely be interested.
Yeah, that is something that we're really looking for. Sorry, I'm getting feedback there.
Oh, sorry, that's probably me.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that we have in the works for next year. Like I wanted to do it in the first year, then I wanted to do it this year. And it just didn't feel safe. And my hope is that, regardless of the status of the pandemic, that, people will be vaccinated or at least comfortable being outside. Most of these events would be outside. And so hopefully it would, and we can self-select as well. But yeah, I'm hoping to organize several of these across the state. And right now I'm working with the regional coordinators to figure out where this should be held. And most likely, they would be at, say, ideally a state park. And then we could get free camping, for everyone. And also have money to provide food as well. And then we can all, sit together and plan which blocks to hit and who's going to go where and how we're going to access those blocks, and then come together and talk about what we found. So yeah, I really look forward to these events, and I really hope we can do them next year. I think we will be able to.
Awesome, thank you. And just try to make some of them, if you can, not always on weekends, because I always work weekends, but I can be off during the week.
That is something we've been discussing.
Yeah. Shift workers.
Great. Other questions?
Hey, Julie, not to put you on the spot too much, and it's okay if you don't have an answer, but I was wondering, you had mentioned there are still some species you expected to get confirmed that haven't yet. Do you have any examples of what we should be out there looking for?
Yeah, Henslow sparrow.
Oh. We know one spot.
Yeah, yeah.
on
no,
it.
So yeah, and I think Irene's still on. Yeah, Irene has submitted some information to me, but yeah, that's one that's still there's got to be more than one spot in the state for them. Black rail, I don't have confirmation. There's only one site in the state where they're known to breed. That's only accessed by state parks. And I have not gotten word from them that they have confirmed them back yet. So that's another one. There's actually a number of waterfowl species that for some reason we're really lacking a lot of the waterfowl species. There's a few of them that we do okay at, but a lot of them are missing. Just we've got the one shoveler, we've got one redhead, a handful of teal. It's just, yeah, there's a number of waterfowl species. Alejandro says we have sedge-wren. Actually, this year was a good year for sedge-wren. Good year for sedge-wren and dickcissel. I know of a chat, not yet in the database, but I do know of one chat. Should be more chats. There should be Kentucky warblers. Yeah, not all in your area, but.
And how are you going to deal with, sharing that data with the public for these more sensitive species?
Yeah, so there's certain species that we've just classified as sensitive species that you submit them to the Atlas and or to eBird actually anywhere in New York State, and they won't show up on the map. So like goshawk, spruce grouse, there's certain species that we just have said anywhere in the state they don't show up. And then we're also, in terms of we'll be getting data from DC and state parks and other organizations, and they're not going to want to have those sensitive information publicly available, at least not in real time. There might have to be some sort of lag. And so we have, depending on the species, it will either just sit, in a database and not be visibly public on eBird, or it'll be delayed by a year or two. And yeah. And there's things you can do as an individual as well. I don't know if you want me to go over that too. Or you can hide your checklist or something like that too. I do see the hidden checklists. At the start of the project, I was telling people not to hide checklists because I couldn't see them. I didn't have access, but now I do have access. So if you do that, I do see those records, but it doesn't show up in the public facing data.
Great. Other questions? Yeah, Tom.
Hey, have you had any thoughts yet about what we can rely on in terms of the Merlin Sound ID?
Yeah. It's really fun to play with, isn't it?
I mean, Merlin said I had a Henslow sparrow this summer, but I had pictures and everybody decided it was a grasshopper sparrow.
Oh, dang. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful piece of information, but it should not be your only source for identifying something. The AI, the artificial intelligence that's being used to figure out what the sounds are is still in development. And they're actually, Cornell is still asking for a lot of recordings for species that have mis-IDs, just so they can refine that and improve their their estimates. I mean, it is a problem. So I have used it I used it quite a bit this summer. Even I was on the testing group even before it came out, and it was really helpful in terms of for some species, but then not for others. So like I had a woodpecker nest, young, and the parents weren't around, and I was like, I don't know, it's a downy or a hairy, I don't know. And then Merlin was like, it's a downy. And I sat there and I waited and waited and waited. And it was downies. It actually was. So that was good. There's other times where, so I'm a bit hard of hearing for the high pitched things. So sometimes I'm like, that's a weird sound. And I'll have Merlin running, and then it will pick up a creeper. And then I start looking around for a creeper and I'm like, there it is. Like I would have totally missed it. So it is helpful for that as well. But then, sometimes I get so stuck with juncos and pine warblers. And I used it this summer. I was like, I don't know what that is. And I couldn't get my eyes on it. And it was like, I don't remember what it said, if it was a pine warbler or junco, but it was the other one. Like it said it was this. And then I actually kept watching, saw it and was like, nope, it's this one. And so, yeah, there's a lot of discussion going on in terms of the eBird regional reviewers of how to deal with a lot of the Merlin IDs that are coming in. But basically, if you don't have something to back up your observation, it's not going to get approved. This is basically the consensus that I've been reading. So in terms of species ID, I'm not reviewing species ID. That's left to the eBird reviewers. I'm really only looking at atlas data. So, breeding codes, things like that. I might find something that I'm like, that seems out of range or out of season. And then maybe I would kick it to a reviewer and say, hey, could you look into this one? But yeah, it's interesting. I think it's super fun and powerful. If there's still some improvement that needs to be made, for sure.
Yeah.
Charlie.
In that regard, I live in Oneonta, and at least in Delaware and Otsego County, there are lots of places where you can't get any cell service even. And if you can't get cell service, Merlin cannot be relied on. It has to know where you are.
It's southwestern birds.
Looking at, yeah. It tells you all kinds of strange birds if it can't tell where you are.
Yeah, that's really funny when that happens. Makes you think though, like there's sometimes where it does that and I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. Those are similar. Yeah. For those of you that don't know Charlie, he's the one I was saying that he is a regional coordinator based out in the Delaware Otsego Bird Club and or Audubon. But we're looking for help for him. So
we would love to find other people to help out.
Okay, well, I guess thank you so much, Julie, for coming and giving us this really insightful presentation. I'm going to stop the recording now also. If anyone